Whatever Zed said. For the first time he arrived at the house without her accompaniment, Henry took on the prospect of stairs. He was clutching onto the handrail with an earnest need as his second wife was clutching onto the collar of a neighbor. He whispered curses under his breath, lamenting the decline of his health ever since handing over his company to his eldest son. At the very same time, different curses were whispered by the unsuspecting pair in the Western Wing bedroom. It was a large room that would have been naturally lit by the windows that coated the walls if it weren't for the willow tree that had grown so tall and wide that its branches spread to block all light. The pale green walls were intended to be bright, welcoming, yet all those stifle-filled shadows clouded any of those ideas. The idea to move up here was Michelle's idea. She needed a space, a slew of rooms. She used to be a suburban secretary. Now she was Michelle with her very own Western Wing bedroom and closet and bathroom and office. Henry had met her years ago, and she had laid in waiting for him while she kept him laid in his loveless marriage. Soon enough, wife number one was out of the picture, along with the affections of Henry's youngest two children. But then there was Kevin, kind Kevin, who had been up in the peninsula for plenty of vacations with his fraternity brothers and highly favored friends. He was quick to take up the mantle for Henry, look out for family assets, and look after his father. He approved of Michelle. Quite frankly, they got along well, and Henry was pleased by this. So pleased, in fact, that he had said yes to a trip up to the peninsula with his new wife and eldest son to celebrate the transfer of the company. After the champagne was popped and they walked throughout the small seaside town, Michelle found herself awestruck from the sight that lay ahead of her. It was the perfect home. Pristine white siding, freshly painted shutters, a wrapping porch, only to be completed by the willow tree that swayed next to it. It was perfect, all that she had envisioned for the day that she had a husband and home to call her own. The men by her side were captured too, taken by the dream that they could have a little piece of the peninsula. There was one problem, a crotchety old man who went by Zed, who owned the shack next to it. Kevin, kind Kevin, approached him and asked who owned the house, so strung out on his own sense of wealth that he was ready to make an offer right then and there. Zed presented the deed and was open to the offer, but didn't let up on his insistence in staying in the small shack that was just beyond the main yard. Henry's eldest son gave his father a wavering look, almost as if to say, "This guy, really? You want him as your neighbor?" Henry said he'd think about it, and the newfound family were on their way. Except Michelle couldn't stop thinking about the place. It was a far cry from what Michelle had made available to her, and because of that, she cried all night long. For 2 days of the vacation, she huffed around the rented holiday house, crossed her arms at every interaction, and only let out a snicker at her husband's jokes. This indifference and attitude provoked Henry so much that he changed his mind. This time, he went to Zed alone. The men spoke in frank terms about their expectations, shook hands, and made a gentleman's deal. Henry took Michelle back there that night and promised her the home. She could hardly believe it was real. She knew that she was new money, and this type of love was new to her. But if the tree of life were to give her lemons, Michelle was the type who was going to make lemonade. Make it she did, making lemonade, love, luxurious parties for the in crowd of her new community. Zed watched from the shack as she threw party after party, even as her husband left the state to go deal with the final legal proceedings of his business deals. The first night he saw the Western Wing bedroom lit up behind the shade of the willow tree was when Henry fell ill. Zed knew a simple stroke was enough to kill a man, no matter how Henry had protested that he was fine when he came and visited with him under the willow tree, where Zed sat with his wood whittling on most days, but mostly Wednesdays. Zed knew Wednesdays were when the pool boys came over. Henry's new home didn't have a pool. That's just what he had affectionately called them. The pool boys were the men who came over, just like the man who was here today. Henry struggled as he ascended the stairs. Zed watched on, knowing more humiliation, known or not, was not needed, not today. With a stubby thumb, Zed pointed at the willow tree. "I think you've sprung a leak, bug. There's a pool up there, watch out." Henry's bushy eyebrows furrowed, frustrated with the supposedly crazy man that he so happened to share land with. But he wasn't crazy. He was just making a joke for himself. Except it wasn't funny once Henry's knees gave out. Was it the gust from the nettled leaves above, the needless and unobvious poke at his very manhood, or the unknown intimacy that lay above in a pale green room? Michelle was laid back, unaware that below her, Henry took to laying on the ground. A winter shiver coursed through the ocean-filled air, shaking them all in their respective fashions. It was a chill so deep that it got through to even Zed's hardened bones. Henry's too, though the full reason he would never know.
Lessons in laundry. Of all the places Tripp thought he might end up in life, the bottom of a dirty clothes hamper was not one of them. Then again, he hadn't anticipated being 6 inches tall at any point in that life either, so the day was full of surprises. Okay, Tripp, he said to himself, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of light finding its way through the underwear, shirts, and jeans that sat atop him. It's now or never. What was the reversing spell? The fact that he couldn't remember it was surprising. He'd read that old magic book countless times, though always in his head, not aloud, and had practically memorized the dozens of incantations and pictures that filled its pages. Even before he owned the book, when it sat in a locked safe under his grandpa's desk and saw daylight only with the supervision of the old man, Tripp could have likely been effective enough to turn his cat into a dog or his sister into a mouse, or perhaps worse. Who can tell with that old magic? Tripp shifted his weight slightly, still unsure of whether he was facing up toward the top of the hamper or down toward its bottom. All he knew was that the weight of those clothes was getting heavier, and the air he was breathing was taking on the humidity of his saliva. He heard a creak, faint, likely from a footstep down the hall from his bedroom. That third board never settled. Could someone be in the house? Someone who could save him from this coffin of clothing? Help, he cried. Help me. Mom, Dad, Brenda, help me. Nothing else. Likely just the house settling. After all, hadn't he decided to pull the book out of its hiding place specifically because no one would be home for the afternoon? I'm doomed, he thought. Even if I do somehow make it out of here, my parents are going to kill me when they find out what I've done. A click, almost just outside the hamper. Could it be his savior? Suddenly, Tripp's whole body was shaking. His ground, his sky, his entire surroundings were shifting, moving, turning. Help, he cried again, realizing someone was reaching into the hamper. Someone would find him and save him. A flash of light as the jeans were lifted away. Tripp was blinded by the sunlight pouring through his window. He held his hands up to his face, then slowly pulled them away as his eyes adjusted, and just in time to see a black, wet nose atop countless sharp teeth, white teeth hurtling at him. He rolled, his body avoiding the snap of incisors around his body, but was not quick enough for his loose shirt to be caught in their clench. And then he was up, pulled into the air, unable to wriggle free from Jasper's grasp. Jasper! Down, boy, put me down, he screamed, his arms and legs flailing as his dog began to shake his new toy. The world was spinning. It was only a matter of time, Tripp realized, before Jasper chomped down on his owner. And then it happened. The words came to him, an image in his mind, so clear that he was saying the words before he even knew why. Incanti foxus monto una felinis, with what he could only assume was his last breath. And then he was airborne. Flying across the room, Tripp looked back to see a cat with wide eyes standing where Jasper had been just moments before. It let out a loud hiss before taking off out of the room, skidding into the doorframe before disappearing down the hall. Tripp hit the ground hard, his shoulder taking the brunt of the impact before rolling butter over biscuits, stopping only because of unusual crease that hindered the rest of the rolls he had left. And as he gathered his bearings, he looked down at the ground, at that familiar text, the well-worn paper of his grandpa's book. Thank God, he cried, standing up slowly, uneasily on his 2 little feet, his 6-inch body bruised but not broken. And there it was, in lettering almost as large as he was tall, the spell he needed. Menios mino bor giganteus. He didn't know how long his eyes were closed or how long he'd been lying there, but when he lifted his arms to see all 10 fingers, looked down to see both legs and feet, and a book of typical size beside him, he knew he was back to normal. The next thing he saw was his mother standing in his doorway, her arms crossed, her eyes almost black and almost as frightening as the scowl on her face. Tripp, she rasped. What have you been up to? Mom, I swear I just wanted to look, he started, but was unable to finish his sentence before his mother released a stream of unintelligible words Tripp had not seen in that book, but had heard when his dad had broken his hand in an unfortunate picture hanging accident. She grabbed the book off the floor, slamming it shut while walking toward his door. Before turning, she said, I'd better not find out that you've been casting any spells while we've been gone. Trip sighed, then chuckled. Don't worry, Mom. I'm over the magic stuff. Grandpa always said it wasn't to be messed with, and I believe him. His mom glared at him, allowing a smirk to cross her face, and then she turned and then walked out of the room. Phew, Trip let out a breath. Close one, though the relief was short-lived. Trip! What the hell did you do to Jasper?
Being Lou, a student at Lunar High, woke up one morning ready to take on the fun and certainly enjoyable school day. Starting off with the usual routine of brushing her teeth, showering, and the best part, eating. As she was eating, she rushed to do her homework, finishing up all she could and putting it on the counter. She was as enthusiastic about school as she was about her vegetables, and she hated vegetables. Finishing up her food, she made her way out the door, and it's pouring raining outside. Just rain. What harm could it cause? She thought, and she grabbed an umbrella and began walking to school. It was about a 15-minute walk, so leaving early was the best idea, but for Lou, leaving late was her mono. It's so displeasing out here. Who even enjoys rain? As she walks through the hard pouring rain that crashes down like a kid coming off a sugar rush. The mud splashing on her as she tries to carefully walk through it without showing up to school looking like candy dipped into chocolate. Splat. She stepped in mud and is now stuck in the rain. What a fantastic day I'm having, as she groans about the situation. Her foot won't budge and she's growing impatient, being that she's already late for school. Pulling at her foot only made matters worse as mud slapped her in the face. The mud smelled like rotten yogurt on a hot day, and she just knew it was in her hair. She's livid. And as she stood there, her foot devoured in the mud, she realized and thought she forgot her homework on her bed this morning. Already 20 minutes late, Bean had dug her foot out the mud and made her way back home. Walking through the house covered in mud is just what her parents needed. But what doesn't kill them makes them angrier, and she knew they'd be angry. But in Lou's defense, she had just the morning too, and she just the morning too, and she just knows they want her at school, so that's what she's doing, trying to get to school. The logic behind why the mud was everywhere made perfect sense, and she's defending her reason. Clothes, bread, and bread spreads and mud being thrown around the room as the homework is nowhere to be found. Time passes and she decides to look into her book bag, and lo and behold, it's her homework sitting there, unbothered. For the love of sanity, give me a break, she laughs. With no time to look at the homework, she dashed out the door, slipping and sliding on her way out, with the only thing on her mind, and that was to get to school. She had everything: her phone, keys, homework, and her sanity from this long morning. I made it. Lou ran through the doors into her first class, ecstatic that she is finally at school. As she's rummaging through her book bag for her homework, the teacher calls on her to bring it up. There's no homework in sight. The papers are scribbles she's drawn from the other day when Miss Longwood, her first block English teacher, was going on about who knows what. Being Lou was fed up with the day. Instead of listening to the teacher, she walked out and went home. As she walked through the doors, all she heard was Bean and Lou. Of course, it's her mom yelling about all the mud. But instead of answering, she goes into her room and says to herself, of course, today's Monday. As she gets into bed and goes under the covers, today has been a rough week, so let's try again never. And Lou is out like a light, the best part of her day.